Welcome back, everyone. Today on the channel, we're going to do the monthly question and answer video. Once a month on the Posts tab, my YouTube channel, I'll put out a question prompt such as this one. Down below, you can ask me anything about anything. Read each other's questions and then thumbs up the ones you want me to respond to. The cutoff for today's video was 70 thumbs up. Thank you so much to everyone who left a question or read each other's questions. We got some good ones today, and this might be the top-ranked question of all time. I've never seen a question get 515 likes before. This is from Nisu Uno. Do you think American generals might refuse Trump's orders to invade Greenland? Yes, I do, but Trump will just keep shopping around until he finds a general who actually will do it. So there is a battle going on within the United States military, refusing Trump's illegal orders, and these commanders are then fired, or they voluntarily resign. They just retire. And I want to highlight this incident when J.D. Vance visited Greenland. This was back in April, and J.D. Vance was promoting Trump's idea of annexing the island, and this was the Space Force base commander. This was not a general, she was only a colonel, but she's Colonel Susanna Myers. And after J.D. Vance made statements about annexing Greenland, she put out a base-wide email saying the United States is not being hostile towards Greenland. The United States military would not support an annexation, so Trump had her fired. Actions to undermine the chain of command or to subvert President Trump's agenda will not be tolerated at the Department of Defense. This is before they renamed it Department of War. Trump has been firing and replacing lots of generals and admirals. There's probably been dozens who have been fired or removed in the last year. And I can't speak for any of these people, what they truly think or feel about this situation. And it is a consequence because they can't speak either. While they wear the uniform, they cannot publicly be partisan. They can't cheerlead Trump, but they also can't criticize or condemn him. The military is supposed to be apolitical. This is necessary for a democracy, but Trump doesn't like that and doesn't want that. He wants lots of tough-looking guys with stars and stripes and medals on their chest, praising him, worshiping him, and cheerleading him. So the current Joint Chiefs of Staff, his name is Dan Kane. Trump fired the other one to put a guy loyal to him in charge. And this is what Trump says about his own chairman. According to Trump, Kane told him, "I love you, sir. I think you're great, sir. I'll kill for you, sir." Allegedly, he claimed that ISIS could be defeated in a week. Trump also said that Kane was wearing a MAGA hat at the time. This is one guy. He is the top general. He's in charge of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But there's lots of generals and admirals underneath him who I'm sure are questioning things and pushing back behind closed doors. This has been going on the entire year. Now, I do have a unique experience as a YouTuber, given that I was an Air Force officer for 6 years. I was only a captain. I'm not trying to inflate my own self-worth, but I do have some perspectives I can share with you. And there's four types of officers. There's Air Force, or there's Academy graduates. There's ROTC graduates, people who go to like University of Wisconsin, University of Michigan, and then they do ROTC on the weekends to then commission as an officer. There's then Officer Training School, that's what it's called in the Air Force. And within OTS, there's two types. There's prior enlisted. These are people who were serving enlisted, got a college degree, and then applied to go to OTS to become an officer. And then there are non-priors. That's what I was. I earned my college degree and I paid for my own schooling because I'm kind of dumb. I then had a degree and I was eligible to go to this special training program for 10 weeks, and then I was blessed and turned into a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. So one of the safeguards of our democracy is the Air Force Academy and all of the academies. There's the West Point, Annapolis, Colorado Springs, New London, and Kings Point. There's also Space Force now, but the 5 branches of the military. Where I'm going with this is these academies want you young, and they don't want you to have any other life experience that might corrupt you. So if you take somebody out of high school when they're 18, you immediately get them into 4 years at the Naval Academy or Air Force Academy. That's all you ever know. You are indoctrinated into the United States military culture, their traditions, their history, and to achieve the status of 4-star general or 4-star admiral, you served in the military for 30 or 40 years. So all of these guys at the top of the military, a lot of them probably went to the academies in like the 1970s or 80s or 90s. And they're just not, I think, in tune with the culture of MAGA and Trump, even if they favor certain policies to be greater use of force or more aggressive. Okay, that's fine. But as far as the rampant corruption, it's endemic within the Trump administration. All of these oligarchs and billionaires are coming in, and it's all about wheeling and dealing and making money for themselves. That's not the culture of officers in the United States military. They're paid very well, and they're paid well so that they're not engaging in corruption or side dealings. And yeah, there was a tiny bit of fraud that I noticed when I served in the Air Force, but nothing blatant. Nothing to the point where I would have to report it to an IG on base or to a JAG. Or where I'm going with this is the reason why the Russian military is performing so badly is because corruption is a feature of the system, a system the United States military for 200 years has been trying to avoid. But this is unavoidable if Donald Trump wants to continue on this path of commanding the military to seize Venezuela's oil so he can then steal the oil, sell it, and keep the money for himself. It's all insane. I understand if you're a casual observer tuning in and you're not paying attention to all the insanely illegal things that Trump is doing every day. This all sounds crazy. There's going to be accountability at some point. For any of these admirals or generals who have been adhering to illegal commands, they will be held accountable in 2029. Under the UCMJ, they need to be prosecuted. These are not civilian courts. These are military courts. And they will be found guilty. They will be stripped of their rank. They will have compensation clawed back. They'll probably serve time in jail. But there needs to be a house-clearing moment in 2029 of any military officers who put loyalty to Trump and MAGA over the Constitution and federal law. But yes, to answer your question, I think it was originally, will they refuse orders? They're doing it. You're just not hearing about it. This one's interesting. This was the second highest ranked question. Can you read the question you find most interesting as well as the highest votes? So much of the voting is influenced by algorithms. It would be great to hear a question you think is insightful, but slips through the algorithm. This was a great suggestion. No one's ever done this before. So I found a question that has no likes, because I don't think people understood what was being asked. This is from Naritha Synth. How many seconds off midnight do you think this year is heading? This individual is referring to the Doomsday Clock, and the Doomsday Clock is a relic of the Cold War. I do remember being a child in the 1980s and 90s occasionally hearing about the Doomsday Clock. Maybe there'd be a Time magazine article or a Lifetime article about it. But in the modern age, people have forgotten what this is and what it means. The Doomsday Clock has never been closer to metaphorical midnight. What does it mean? And I'll just read for you in the event you don't know what the Doomsday Clock is. The Doomsday Clock is a symbol that represents the estimated likelihood of a human-made global catastrophe, in the opinion of the nonprofit organization Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. This clock has been maintained since 1947. The clock is a proxy mechanism for threats to humanity from unchecked scientific and technological advances. A hypothetical global catastrophe is represented by midnight on the clock, so it's a countdown to our own death and destruction. The main factors influencing the clock are nuclear warfare, climate change, and artificial intelligence. The Bulletin's Science and Security Board monitors new developments in the life sciences and technology that could inflict irrevocable harm to humanity. The clock's original setting in 1947 was 7 minutes to midnight. This is the Cold War between the Western Alliance and the Soviet Union. It has since been set backwards, so things have gotten better 8 times, and forwards 18 times. The farthest time from midnight was 17 minutes in 1991. So as the Soviet Union was collapsing and Eastern Europe was getting democracy and capitalism and freedom, the clock was at 17 minutes, meaning things were pretty good for the world in 1991. But as of January 2025, the closest it's ever been is 89 seconds. 89 seconds until our apocalypse. So the original question is, where do you think the clock will be when they make their announcement? I'm guessing they do this in January of every year or so. Yeah, they're going to move it forward. Given that Donald Trump is threatening to invade a NATO country, Greenland, currently we're at 89 seconds, and they're going to move it forward probably to 85 or 80 seconds, or maybe we'll get within the 1 minute mark. Because we're not really doing too well on climate change, out of control artificial intelligence, or nuclear proliferation. A nuke has not gone off, but the threat grows because Trump does not believe in the nuclear shield anymore, the nuclear umbrella. Basically, the United States extends its nuclear deterrent to our democratic allies so that Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada, Poland, Finland don't have to develop their own nukes. But Trump is not offering that security guarantee to anyone anymore. He's threatening to attack the Kingdom of Denmark. Things are bad, but there might be some hope. Don't click out of the video. Let's get to some future questions. I do have some good information for you guys. Next question is from Fred. Why is Trump able to get away with so many technically illegal actions? As a Brit, I just don't get it. Yeah, that's a complicated question. The first one is, Trump is committing crimes that no president in history has been dumb enough or brazen enough to commit. And one of them is the Emoluments Clause in the United States Constitution. If you ask the average American, do you know what the Emoluments Clause is? No Americans do, but it's in the Constitution. And basically this stops federal officials, including the president, from accepting gifts, payments, or benefits from foreign states or the federal government itself beyond their own official compensation, unless Congress votes on it. So this $400 million plane being given to Trump from Qatar, that's in violation of the Constitution. He accepted a $400 million gift, a plane he will be keeping for himself. There's all other kinds of crazy things that he's done in violation, but basically any foreign government or head of state, you can't even meet with Trump or talk to him unless you are offering something to enrich him and his family. It's the most corrupt administration in the history of America, and he just does it out in the open, and I think this just kind of shocks a lot of people to the point where they don't even know how to process it. It's so crazy illegal. So there's that point. He's just doing things that no one would ever think of doing, and somehow that kind of triggers people's brains to just keep moving. But then there's the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is corrupt. This institution is completely irrelevant. They are not willing to check any of the illegal things that Donald Trump is doing. For one, 3 of these judges he appointed, so those 3 aren't going to question him or challenge him. You then have Clarence Thomas, who has accepted millions of dollars in gifts and bribes from billionaires. He's the most corrupt Supreme Court justice in American history, and the Senate won't remove him because he's one of their guys. You've got Alito. Alito and Clarence Thomas flew symbols for January 6th, indicating that they publicly supported the insurrection and the overthrowing of our democracy, and they're still sitting on the court. Roberts is technically a Republican. He doesn't vote with the Republicans very often, but he still protects Clarence Thomas and Alito. This institution is irrelevant. They're not going to help anyone. The only way to get rid of Trump is through the official impeachment process. The Supreme Court has ruled that the president is above the law. He is free to break the law whenever he wants, in any way he deems necessary, and only Congress can check or remove the president. To do this, you need a 2/3 majority. The House has to vote to impeach, draft the articles, there's a trial, the Chief Justice sits during the trial, and then the Senate votes. The Democrats have already impeached Trump twice, but his own party members refused to remove him from office. So there we go. This is how American democracy turned into a fascist dictatorship. All you need to do is win the presidency once and control 34 seats in the Senate. If you can just get 34 people in the Senate to go along with your dictatorship, then you can't be removed. There's no checks. Currently, the Democrats control basically 47 seats. To get to 67, 20 of these Republicans would have to vote with the Democrats, and they're just never going to do it. Donald Trump is obviously in the Epstein files. The guy has raped children who were sex trafficked on an island. There's probably video and recording of it at the Justice Department right now. And these people do not care. They will never turn on him. They are part of this new Christian nationalist fascist state that's going to start attacking Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Colombia and Mexico. Concerning the Senate, what happens, the reason why American democracy has failed is because of the primary system. Because so many of these states are non-competitive. They're either solidly blue Democrat or they're solidly red Republican. Democrats and Republican incumbents don't worry about the general election. 80% of members of Congress do not fear the general election because they're in a solid blue or red state or they're in a gerrymandered House district. The only thing they care about or fear is the primary process. And to illustrate this, I love highlighting the example of Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. This guy was an Air Force Judge Advocate General, so he knows what the law is. He knows what the Constitution is. You can look at clips of him from 2016 condemning Trump, calling Trump a fascist. But this guy loves being a senator, and he doesn't want to lose his seat to a more extreme Republican in the primary process. So this has been Lindsey Graham's pinned tweet since March 26th of 2025, almost a year ago, saying, "President Trump's endorsement means the world to me. I am humbled by his faith in me as a senator and a friend." This is Lindsey Graham telling the other Republicans in his state, "Stay out of my primary. Do not primary me. I want to be a senator for another 6 years." And Lindsey Graham is not going to question or challenge anything that Donald Trump does until he wins his primary. He's not worried about the general election against a Democrat. The Democrat's going to lose in South Carolina. He only cares about winning the primary within his party. So the primary structure promotes extremism. It's only the most extreme, crazy people who win these primaries because they're not really paid attention too much. Participation is extremely low. People don't even know there are primary elections in like May, April, and June, 6 months before the general election. So I do think the Democrats are actually going to take back the House before November. I think enough Republicans will just quit Congress in the next 10 months and the Democrats will gain control of the Speaker of the House. That's good news because then they can start doing hearings and investigations. Concerning the Senate, the Democrats should be competitive in states close to Canada because Trump is threatening Canada. So I think the Democrats have a real chance of winning in Montana. John Tester could just run again. They should win in Maine and Alaska. They're going to be competitive in North Carolina, Florida, Texas, maybe Iowa, and Ohio. All of these special elections that the Republicans have been having the last year have been disastrous. Democrats in the November off-year election swept everything. There was like 11 states and they won every single thing. So I know from my European friends, they want us to take to the streets, start flipping over cop cars, rioting, get Donald Trump out of the White House. You only do a revolution if the elections are rigged. So as long as we have a free and fair election in November, the Republicans are going to be wiped out. I am paranoid that one of Trump's billionaire allies bought the Dominion voting machine company, so we need to be careful of that. But the beauty of American democracy is we don't have a national system. There's nothing that Trump and J.D. Vance can do to rig all the elections because each state runs its own election in its own way. The voting rules and process is different in every single state. That's federalism. That's one of the checks on America becoming a fascist dictatorship. So we're going to find out what's going to happen in 10 months. The November election is 10 months away, and if we are allowed to have free and fair elections, MAGA is going to be wiped out. Doesn't remove Trump, but it will make things more difficult. Now, I do have a solution. Long-term, how do we fix American democracy? And what we need is nonpartisan primaries. What that means is you can run as a Democrat or a Republican, that's fine. If you want a party label, okay. But there needs to be a jungle primary where only the top two candidates move on to the general election. So right now, Republicans have their own primary, Democrats have their own primary. The most extreme within each party then goes to the general election, and usually one gets wiped out because of the gerrymandering or the safe states. But if we had a jungle primary where it's the top two going to the general election, in red states, the election would then be an extremist Republican versus a moderate Republican. In the blue states, it would be an extremist Democrat versus a moderate Democrat. It still would be Republican versus Democrat if they were the top two vote getters in the primary, but this would force politicians to appeal to the center, to the broader public. If you need 50.1% of the vote, you have to talk to the other side. The way it is now in Utah, Republican elected officials don't talk to Democratic voters. And in maybe states like Oregon or Washington, Democratic elected officials don't talk to Republican voters. There's no reason to. But if we amended the Constitution to create this top two primary or jungle primary or nonpartisan primary, whatever you want to call it, this would force politicians to appeal to the center to get that 50.1% of the vote. And this would fix a lot of the extremist issues in America. So I'm hoping in 2029 there will be the political will and courage to amend the Constitution. This is a very difficult thing to do. I think you need 2/3 votes in both chamber and then 3/4 of state legislatures to amend the Constitution, which is why it rarely happens, but we do need to amend the Constitution to prevent another scenario in the future like Donald Trump repeating. Next question. Hi Jake, Dane here. Denmark was one of the first to pledge F-16s and at one point donated our entire stock of Caesar artillery to Ukraine. That was incredible, I remember that. We are a small nation, but we went all in because we see this as an existential fight. My question is, from your perspective inside the United States, why is it psychologically easier for small European nations to understand the existential nature of this threat than it is for a superpower like the United States? Is it just distance, or has the US lost the ability to recognize a black and white moral conflict? To begin, the United States has always struggled with black and white moral conflicts. Famously, the United States joined World War I late and even joined World War II late. The United States didn't oppose Hitler and the Nazis officially until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So Europe was struggling against a fascist, evil dictator, and the United States just in the 1930s was minding its own business, trying to stay out of Europe's entanglements. So specifically your question, Denmark only has 6 million people. The world that you see is drastically different than the world that a Chinese person sees, or a Russian sees, or an American sees, simply because of the size of your country and the population of your country. I love meeting and talking to people from smaller nations because they're generally more well-informed about global events and global history, because I think for them it's more interesting. I'm not saying Danish history is not fascinating. I'm sure it is. I would love to learn more. But Denmark's history has not been deciding the fate of the world, whereas with China or Russia or the United States, they've been superpowers or are superpowers, and they do shape the way the world goes. So inflexively, smaller nations have to pay attention to us, but we don't have to pay attention to smaller nations to still feel like we understand what's going on in the world. And I know I've had this conversation with non-Americans before, but I just don't think people in Europe or Asia or wherever understand truly how big the United States is. This is just the state of Texas on top of the European continent. This is one state. Factor in Florida, California, New York, Alaska. The United States is massive, and we are blessed. The United States has the best geography in the world. We have the best farmland in the world. We are easily defensible, 2 oceans on either side, a temperate climate. Canada to the north, they should be our friends, and Mexico to the south, I personally think they're our friends. And if you're born in a small town in Iowa or a small town in New Mexico or Idaho or Indiana, you never have to leave. You never have to think about anyone else in the world, and you can live your entire life just fine. I'm not saying that's a good way to live your life, but there are hundreds of millions of Americans who live a life like that. They never leave the United States. They never think about what's happening outside the United States. And it doesn't help that our media reinforces this imperial mindset of the United States as an economic empire, a global superpower, and the world revolves around us. I personally don't believe that. I'm a student of history. I am well-traveled around the world. But for the average American who is not well-educated or well-traveled or well-cultured, this is a very comforting narrative fed to them by conservative and right-wing media. The United States is the best. There's nothing else better than the United States. Why would you question our own system? Why would you want to think about changing anything? America's number one. When if you look at the infographics, no, America is not number one in a lot of things. But people don't feel that way. And unfortunately, the situation has just gotten a lot worse the last 10 years especially, because there's so much consolidation happening, and a lot of these oligarchs and billionaires are Trump's allies. They are controlling the media. They are controlling the narrative. This is a lie that the mainstream media is left-wing. No, it's not. Individual anchors and journalists and the facts might be left-leaning, but as far as who owns these companies, when you turn on the television, when you turn on the radio, when you go on a social media platform, the guy at the top is in favor and supporting Donald Trump right now. They're all in on it. This is the deep state. This is the global conspiracy. And they're really good at what they do, controlling the minds of the average American. But maybe there's hope. I want to recommend a book to you guys if you're an avid reader. And this is a book I just finished this week, and it's called Everything is Effed, a book about hope by Mark Manson. Mark Manson, he's written 2 books. If you want, you can skip the first one. I think this book was much more worth your time and interesting. But he's also on YouTube. He's got almost 3 million subscribers. He has many videos that have gone over 1 million views. He's a very insightful and intelligent guy. I highly recommend him. But he explains philosophy, I think, in an easy way that the average American can understand it. Most academics use terminology and language that is exclusive because they're trying to position themselves with their peers to appear more intelligent or accomplished. When we need complex ideas to be broken down and explained in common language for the average person to understand, that's, I think, what I try to do on this channel, but I'm not pretending for you guys. When I talk to you, this is what I actually look like, this is what I actually sound like, this is how I speak to my family and friends. I am highly educated. I have a master's degree in international relations, but I've never been, in my opinion, like a liberal elitist or anything like that. But I do appreciate academics. I have friends who are professors. And let me read for you something I learned in this book. I took 12 pages of notes, so there was a lot of good stuff in here that I just wanted to retain for my own personal knowledge going into the future. But something that this book really hammered to me that I do think has changed my perspective on the world and every human being that I will meet and talk to for the rest of my life. People don't make decisions based on truth or facts. They don't spend their money based on data. They don't connect with each other because of some higher philosophical truth. The world runs on feelings. And when you give the average person an infinite reservoir of human wisdom, they will not Google for the information that contradicts their deepest held beliefs. They will not Google for what is true, yet unpleasant. Instead, most of us will Google for what is pleasant, but untrue. It continues, the internet, in the end, was not designed to give us what we need. Instead, it gives people what they want. And if you've learned anything about human psychology in this book, you already know that this is much more dangerous than it sounds. You can make YouTube videos, you can post on the internet, you can present the facts, but people don't see them. They don't even take them in. If a piece of information conflicts with what people want to be true, what they feel is true, there's a million terms in human psychology to justify why you can just disregard that information, keep moving. So we're not seeing the world the same way. Every person born is unique and different. And what I think is fascinating is, like, you can do this experiment with anyone. You can ask anyone, can I see your phone? And then open up Instagram, open up TikTok, open up Twitter or Facebook or whatever social media platform they have. And every human being is a unique experience. When you scroll on the phone, you're mostly only seeing what you want to see, what makes you feel good, and what gets you through the day so that none of your beliefs are being challenged and you can go to bed that night confident you're right and the other person is wrong. When you log on to these social media platforms, you're getting a software update for your brain. And whoever controls the algorithms, whoever controls the platforms, they control the people. These people, I'm not claiming I'm an exception, by the way. These people are slaves to these algorithms, and the situation is only going to get worse. I understand this might sound terrifying to you, but these are the new rules of the game. We're not going back to the way it was in the 1990s where people got their news and information from newspapers and magazines and radio and TV. We've made the jump to light speed, to something new and different. And unless we understand what's happening to us, we can't even begin to address the problem. Next question, would the US military follow orders to truly invade another country like Greenland without explicit congressional approval? My answer is yes, because it just happened in Venezuela. There was no congressional approval, consent, statutory vote to make any military action in Venezuela legal, and Delta Force still went in, killed a bunch of people, and kidnapped Maduro. Maduro's a bad guy. I'm not defending Maduro, but Trump is trying to keep Maduro's vice president in office as the new pro-Trump dictator of Venezuela. So it's not the job of these guys to... They're highly trained, highly disciplined, and they're the best in the world at what they do. But if their commanding officer tells them to go into some place and do something, they're special forces. They're going to do it. But it's a very small number of them. This is not the general military at large. I think if we were talking about a larger land-scale invasion somehow, yeah, you're going to get a lot of enlisted people asking questions and refusing. But for these guys, if they're told to do it, they're probably going to go do it. These are all the countries that Donald Trump has bombed since coming back into office in the last year. Nigeria, Somalia, Yemen, Venezuela, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Mexico. The president is allowed to take military action if there is an urgent need, an urgent necessity, but there's some kind of War Powers Act where within a certain amount of time, he then has to go to Congress and get a statutory vote to approve it. This is not a declaration of war, but anytime the president uses the military abroad, Congress has to be informed and Congress has to vote. And Donald Trump has said, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm the president, I'm the dictator, I'm going to bomb, kill, take whatever I want, and I'm just going to ignore Congress. That's really what Trump is doing. Like, in Russia, Putin would get a vote. The Duma would vote for anything that Putin says, does, or wants. But Trump doesn't actually control Congress. If Trump tried to get a vote on invading Greenland, there would be like 3 or 4 or 5 Republican senators or whoever who wouldn't vote for it. He would lose the vote, and that would be embarrassing. So his response is, I'm just going to pretend like Congress doesn't exist, and I'm going to do whatever I want. The Senate is not going to impeach me. I can do whatever I want. That's his current position. How will the USA ever get back to pre-Trump era? It probably will not, but there must be a path. Honestly, it will be a challenge everywhere, German here with AfD looming, but we need to find a way to defeat fascism everywhere. For now, the role model is Ukraine. Keep up your great determination. It's actually sad when I talk to younger people in their 20s and early 30s, and they can't even remember the 2012 election. If you want to go on YouTube and watch the presidential debate between Obama and Mitt Romney, this was a completely different country. That doesn't exist anymore. Social media and Donald Trump has changed everything, and we're never going back to this. We're never going back to Ivy League educated, career politicians, one's a governor, one's a senator, ooh, which one's better? Nobody cares. The only thing that matters is who gets the most attention, who has the largest following. And social media is the future. If you want to be elected president of the United States, then you need to be able to comfortably go on Joe Rogan and have a 2 to 3 hour conversation with this guy about whatever. Because this guy represents the average Joe in America. And Tim Walz and Kamala Harris were invited to come on his show, and they refused. And they lost. The Democrats outspent the Republicans in 2016, outspent in 2022, outspent in 2024, and yet they still lost. The old system doesn't work anymore of just fundraising hundreds of millions of dollars and then buying TV ads and newspaper ads and whatever the old system was. The future is free advertising by just talking to social media influencers. MAGA does this. MAGA does it very well. And the Democrats have to adapt. They have to be able to go on these shows and fight back when they're asked a bullshit question or they catch the host in a lie. Kamala Harris wasn't willing to do it. Tim Walz wasn't willing to do it. We also need, over the next 3 years, large American influencers to become political, to help fight back against MAGA and all of their right-wing influencers. And I posted this across all my social media. This was a video from Hank Green about the murder of Renee Good in Minneapolis. And our president and our vice president just lie. Trump put out a tweet saying the ICE officer was run over and in the hospital recovering. A proven lie. J.D. Vance said all 3 shots went through the front of the windshield because Renee Good was trying to run over the ICE officer. That's also a proven lie. 2 of the shots went through the open passenger window. So that's what Hank Green called out in this video, but he says in this video, I don't want to talk about politics. Politics is ugly. Politics is uncomfortable. People like Hank Green just want to be a fun science guy, talking about interesting things. But if people like Hank Green remain silent, then our democracy dies. I'm already political adjacent, talking about the war in Ukraine. It kind of makes sense for me to also trash Trump and try and protect my democracy. But we need more mainstream, normal influencers who talk about fitness or finance or sports or whatever. Those people need to speak up. They need to help save our country from basically just becoming Putin and Russia on a larger scale. But the old system has to die. People like Chuck Schumer, who's useless. Technically, I think he is the leader of the opposition in America. And this guy is clueless. I don't want to be or sound ageist here because I think Bernie Sanders is older than him and Bernie Sanders is doing great. But Chuck Schumer needs to go. He needs to be primaried by somebody or voluntarily retire. And we need younger, better communicators who can comfortably make content on social media. If you can't hold up a phone and take a 60-second vertical video making a clear argument that is persuasive to the American people, then you need to get out of politics. You can no longer compete in the new landscape that we all live in. There are lots of people, and I think my current senator, or I think my congressman is Dina Titus. And I never seen this woman on social media. She is a legacy politician who just calls billionaires begging for money. She uses that money to buy direct mailers and TV ads, and that's how she expects to stay in Congress for the rest of her life. When that's not where the battle is. You're not helping our democracy if all you do is fundraise from billionaires and then buy TV ads. Democrats also have to give up on only having a social agenda. Nothing wrong with fighting for equality and fair practices, and I'm a liberal, guys. But if you're only doing stuff that is symbolic and doesn't actually benefit anyone, you're not going to win elections. And I can give the example of Joe Biden making Juneteenth a federal holiday. This was made a federal holiday in 2021. I'm not trying to disrespect the holiday of Juneteenth, but probably 96% of Americans don't know what it is. This event, the slaves in Texas learning that they had been freed, this happened 160 years ago. There's nobody alive that remembers anyone who was still alive that celebrated this event. So Democrats have to stop doing purely symbolic stuff that doesn't actually benefit anyone. They need to concede some of these culture points that I think don't help anyone. But then that means the counter to MAGA and what Trump and these tech oligarchs are doing, it's economic populism. And economic populism makes a lot of people uncomfortable in America because they'll be labeled communists, they'll be labeled socialists, whatever. But this is a winning formula. The middle class in the United States is getting absolutely crushed. There is an affordability crisis in America, and the free market can't fix it on its own. The free market is making it worse. We need government regulation and government intervention for healthcare, for housing, for education, for everything that a normal society needs to function. Everyone in Europe has figured this out. People in China have figured this out. People in South Korea, Japan, Australia. The affordability issue concerning housing and healthcare and food, it's much better in other democracies where they have increased government regulation. So Bernie Sanders had the winning message in 2016. He also had it in 2020. And I think whoever will be the next president, they're just going to take Bernie Sanders' message, but they're going to be younger and more compelling in some way. People like Bernie Sanders. People are willing to vote for a socialist if you can have a normal conversation and look and sound relatable. This is what is happening with the new mayor of New York City. If my viewer from Denmark is still watching, the population of Denmark is 6 million. The population of New York City is over 10 million. So it's a big deal that this guy became president, or he became mayor of New York City. But he did this through social media. The fact that he can just on command film a vertical video and then have it go viral. You have to look good, you have to sound good, and you have to be relatable. Most Americans are willing to compromise on certain issues or policies if they like you, if they identify with you. This is what the Democratic Party needs, and it can be different in every state. I don't think Zoran Mamdani would have won the governor's race in Iowa or the senator race in Kentucky. So these economic populists in the Democratic Party who are coming up now, they're going to look drastically different, and they should, because America is a very diverse place. So I want to highlight a Democrat. His name is James Talarico. He's running for Senate in Texas, and I think this guy is going to win. If you've not seen any of his videos on social media, he is a very charismatic and compelling person who's got a great message. And I do think that in November, he will win the Senate race in Texas. So stay tuned for that. Next question. Big fan from Sydney, Australia. What % of Russia's nukes do you believe would actually work? Yes, they have more than anyone else, but they also boasted about having more tanks than anyone else. Now they are using Cold War tanks, and we have seen how that's worked out. I understand a handful of nukes could be disastrous, but is Russia even maintaining these nukes with all the problems they are facing, and after a 1001 and threats to use them, are they even confident it will work out for them? Keep up the great work. This is one of the most frequent questions I get on the channel because I used to be a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile officer. And something I can say about my time in the Air Force being around these ICBMs, stuff breaks all the time. Maintenance to keep these systems running is constant. So I just think about how hard American maintainers work to keep everything functioning at these launch capsules and missile silos. And then I think about the Russian system and how incompetent and flawed and corrupt the Russian system in the military is, and that's got to lead to some systems going offline, or we call them sorties, being down from alert. And we see the results of Russia's failed system. They've had a series of high-profile failures. And this isn't their regular stuff sitting in Siberia. These are their test launches, where they should have done everything by the book. This was a hilarious incident. This was November last year, a year and a half ago almost. Sarmat failure casts doubt on Russia's heavy ICBM. This was their test silo for a Sarmat ICBM, and it blew up in the hole. It's pretty funny. This also happened 2 months ago, a failed test launch in Yasny. This was just on November 28th. This was another, I think, ICBM that blew up right after taking off. So if they're test launches, their best stuff that has been looked over twice and everyone's paying attention, if this stuff is blowing up, then yeah, I think the average silo in Siberia is not doing pretty well as far as being up to code. Russia knows this and they don't care. This is why they have so many nuclear weapons. Russia has 4,300, I think, actively deployed, and then they've probably got another 1,100 stockpiled somewhere that they can rotate in and out. And if Russia launched everything, what would be the failure rate? 50%. Russia doesn't care because that's still over 2,000 thermonuclear weapons going off all over the world. That's more than enough to destroy every major urban center in Europe and North America. So, no, we don't want Russia launching. No, we can't rely on Russia's nukes failing. They simply have too many. What do you think is the best response for Denmark and the EU to Trump regarding his aspirations for Greenland? This is serious advice, but the first one is just keep stalling for time. If you can say something to Trump that isn't entirely true, that might waste some time, do it. This is what you're holding out for, because I think once the Democrats control Congress in November, Trump will be more distracted. Depending on how decisive the elections are, there will be more military officers unwilling to break the law for Trump. So if you can hold out, that's a good strategy. But aside from that, the most devastating thing that America's old allies can do is stop buying U.S. Treasury debt. If you hold U.S. Treasury debt, sell it on the secondary market. America's Achilles heel, the thing that might actually destroy us the next 3 years, is the national debt. U.S. hits $38 trillion in debt after the fastest accumulation of $1 trillion outside of the pandemic. I think we're going to start adding $2 trillion to the national debt every year under Trump. Revenue collection is going down because Trump fired a bunch of people at the IRS. The Republicans passed these tax cuts that mostly benefit billionaires like Trump and his friends, and this is unsustainable. The national debt is growing faster than the economy can support it, and the U.S. credit rating has been downgraded. But if Trump is threatening our European allies, then why would our European allies continue to hold our debt? So the UK controls or holds about $800 billion. Belgium holds $300 billion. South Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada. Canada probably holds a lot. You guys can just start selling it. And what this does is it causes treasury yields to spike. When bonds that have already been purchased are dumped on the secondary market, usually you have to dump them at a discount, and then it increases the attractiveness of the return. Why does this matter? And this matters because as Treasury yields go up, I think it's called the rate of risk-free return for bonds or whatever goes down. If bond yields go up, it means that your country's bonds are riskier of default or whatever. And having a higher attractive percentage rate draws money away from other asset classes. So if other countries dump their bonds, American bond yields will go up. This will attract more people to buy American bonds at higher rates, and then they're not putting money into real estate. They're not putting money into crypto. They're not putting money into the stock market. There's less liquidity and less investment. This would generally hurt the American economy. People know this. Currently, the 10-year Treasury yield is 4.2%. And why do people in Europe or Asia still buy U.S. Treasury debt? And it's because the bond rates, for example, for Germany, their 10-year bond is 2.8. If you're a wealthy person, would you rather get 4.2% risk-free on your bonds or 2.8? The reason why the rate in Germany is lower is because it's seen as being less risky than Donald Trump in the United States. But if this goes up, this affects mortgage rates, it affects a lot of things. Like the bond market controls way more in America than people realize. And yes, there is this silver bullet that all of our allies hold, and they're not pulling the trigger yet. But if they wanted to, they could. And seriously, bad things economically would then happen in the United States. I should really make a dedicated video about that, but that was my short summary. Hi Jake, why don't we hear news of the Russian gasoline shortage affecting the country? News search shows no articles for over a month. Seems that surely there must be bad effects we're not hearing about. This was pretty exciting last August and September when we saw the gasoline lines, but Russia was able to adapt. First thing they're doing is they're importing gasoline for the first time from Belarus. So they're exporting raw crude to Belarusian refineries and then importing from Belarus gasoline for their own domestic market. That's really embarrassing for the Russians, but maybe you're saying Belarus is basically part of Russia anyways. But it's also Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is also exporting gasoline and refined products to Russia to compensate for Russian oil refineries going offline. But then also Russia has spare refining capacity. Even though Ukraine is doing a fantastic job attacking these refineries and triggering downtime for maintenance, Russia still just has a lot of spare capacity they weren't using. There was redundancy in the systems, excess parts. Maybe they're producing less other refined products like benzene and instead focusing on making gasoline so that there's not gasoline shortages in the country. Russia adapted. Doesn't mean Ukraine should stop attacking their refineries. There is a breaking point somewhere. Ukraine just has to find it. This is a great question. How do you maintain your own wellness? After all these years reporting, reviewing, and watching endless horrors, I hope you have a healthy way to stay well. And as a follow-up, when this war is ended justly, where will you go for a very well-deserved vacation? I've read a couple books in the last year that I think have changed my entire life. Today, January of 2026, I feel the healthiest and happiest I've ever felt in my own personal life. I understand the world is a disaster and I have to stare at it all day, every day on social media. But as far as my own personal bubble, my own personal world, I'm actually very grateful and I'm doing very well. And let me share with you a couple of these books that I've read in the last year that have, I think, changed my life. The first one is Fast Feast Repeat. This is about intermittent fasting. And I don't need to lose weight. I'm not overweight or anything. My sister bought this book for me because in our family we have a history of diabetes and other health diet-related complications. And I did learn some interesting things in this book that I am applying. One of them is I go 12 hours every day without eating. So I'll try and be done eating by 8 or 9 p.m. I don't eat until 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. the next day. This is a very easy thing to do that anyone can do. Just go half the day without eating, and this gives your stomach and your guts and your biome a chance to clear out, a chance to basically heal from all the food you ate that day. And just by doing this one simple thing, I feel the health benefits. So if you do want to lose weight, intermittent fasting is the way to go, and this book has a lot of interesting techniques. Basically, you just extend that window that you don't eat to 14 hours, 16 hours, whatever you think you can do. It's an interesting book. I appreciated learning about the science, even though I don't need to lose weight. I also read this book by Wim Hof, and maybe people in Europe know Wim Hof better than Americans do. He's Dutch, by the way, so I'm Dutch-American. And I thought this was an interesting book. Once again, learned a lot. I personally don't enjoy ice showers or ice baths or being cold, so I'm not adapting that part of his philosophy, but I have adapted his breathing techniques. Wim Hof has 3 million subscribers on YouTube, and he's just a very loving and caring guy. Like, he's not trying to market or sell you anything. He genuinely just wants to make the world a better place. A very charismatic guy. And what I learned from him and that I've adopted is his breathing techniques. I'll link this down below. It's an 11-minute video. Wim Hof guided breathing for beginners, 3 rounds at a slow pace. I've been doing this almost every day. I work out at home, and usually I'll do this breathing exercise before working out. And then on filming days when I make YouTube videos, I now do this breathing exercise before filming a video. This, I think, helps with circulation, but it's also kind of like a form of meditation. I don't even think Wim Hof explained it this way, but when you're concentrating on your breathing, when the only thing you're doing is focusing on breathing, it kind of pushes all the other stress and strain on your mind out temporarily, and it has this cleansing, resetting effect. This is something that I think has been improving my own mental health as I've been doing this breathing exercise now for about 3 or 4 months, and I'm just going to keep doing it forever. There's no reason to stop. There's so many ancient philosophies and religions that have emphasized the benefits of breathing techniques as well as meditation, and for 10 minutes a day, you honestly can't beat this. So I'll link this down below if you want to give it a shot. The only thing I'll tell you is I recommend breathing in through the nose and then out through the mouth, but you can do whatever you want. Another book that I read last year that has changed my life, this might be my one of my top 5 books that I've ever read, The Case Against Sugar. And this is controversial because people love sugar. They love their sweets, and I'm guilty of that. I've been a sugar addict for 40 years. I remember being 5 years old and having my first donuts, and it was a religious experience to me. And I've been a chronic soda drinker and cookie eater, and I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't gamble. My vice has always been sugar. And reading this book and just learning about the consequences of chronic overconsumption of sugar for decades, it's just as bad as smoking cigarettes for decades. So this was a kind of a wake-up moment for me. I thought that I ate healthy enough, but I was wrong. And as soon as I started cutting out maybe more than 50% of my sugar consumption daily, I immediately started feeling better. Overconsumption of processed sugar had been making me chronically ill my entire life. And I never felt what should be my normal until I was a 40-year-old man. That shouldn't be. I view myself as an educated person, and I was completely oblivious to how much sugar was making me feel unhealthy. So the number one thing I can tell people is do not drink caloric soda or caloric energy drinks or caloric anything. The number one tip I can give people is drink liquid that does not have any calories. If you do that, you'll be cutting out the sugar. This is the nutrition label on a can of Coke. There's 39 grams of sugar in a can of Coca-Cola. But just switch to Coke Zero, Mountain Dew Zero, Dr. Pepper Zero. Whatever your favorite drink is, I'm sure there is a 0-calorie version. Just start drinking that. It might be weird for the first couple days, but then you'll get over it. Same thing is true for Gatorade. They make 0-calorie Gatorade or whatever popular beverage you enjoy. Doing this one thing will drastically change your life for the better. But sugar, in America especially, is put in everything, and I did not understand this. I had been buying almond milk for my protein shakes, and there was added sugar, and I didn't even realize it. So I switched to unsweetened almond milk for my protein shakes, and you can do this with almost any product in the grocery store. Same is true, well, let's do this one first. For Thanksgiving and Christmas last year, I bought my first ever can of zero sugar Ready Whip. You know, on like your pumpkin pie. There's no reason to have sugar. It tastes delicious. You cannot tell the difference between caloric whipped cream or regular whipped cream. Like I said, every product is like this. Now, if you want snacks, eat snacks that don't have added sugar. And protein bars are a good alternative. They are slightly more expensive than a candy bar, but if you actually value your health, stop eating packaged goods with added processed sugar. You can switch to protein bars. They taste delicious. They work fantastic. You don't need to be in the gym. You don't need to be working out to enjoy a protein bar. What I learned in this book is the body needs protein, let's see here, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber. And processed sugar gives you nothing. We call it empty calories, but overconsumption over decades wears out your pancreas, wears out your immune system, triggers autoimmune diseases, and just in the couple months that I've reduced my own sugar intake, I feel incredibly better. I still enjoy cookies, guys. I still enjoy birthday cake. I still eat sugar. I just eat a lesser amount. I've mentioned a lot of books in this Q&A video. And in the events you don't have the time or focus to read, I highly recommend getting an account with Audible. I do think Audible is the most important streaming platform, and nobody talks about it. And I would love to see Audible reform in a way where it basically becomes like a Spotify equivalent. On Spotify, you pay a monthly fee, and then you can listen to whatever you want. Audible should do the same thing. Rather than buying audiobooks individually, maybe you could just pay $20 a month, and then you can listen to whatever you want, and then the artist or author gets a share of your monthly revenue like it is on Spotify. I think if Audible did this, and they probably won't change, but if they did this, more people would listen to audiobooks. And audiobooks are just a superior form of podcasting. How many hundreds of hours does the average American consume now in podcasts on YouTube and Spotify? And they're not listening to audiobooks, which is a higher concentration from more intelligent and accomplished people than the average podcaster. This is coming from somebody with a podcast, so if you don't have an account with Audible, I highly recommend it. They're not sponsoring me. I just think listening to audiobooks is a great way to learn wherever and whenever you can. Aside from that, I do have a girlfriend, I do have friends, I do have strong bonds with my family members. That keeps me emotionally healthy and grounded. I went to Arizona the other month and stayed at a Frank Lloyd Wright house with my father. My father is an architect, so if you want to see a tour of a Frank Lloyd Wright house, it's a $7 million Frank Lloyd Wright house. It's really cool. I'll link this down below. This is on my second YouTube channel, Jake Bro Overflow. And then you also said, what are you going to do when the war ends? And I hope the war is over by May or June. But this May or June, I am planning a 2-week trip to go to South Korea with my girlfriend. I lived in South Korea for 6 years, and it's a fantastic place to visit. It's very easy and affordable to get around. My girlfriend obviously has never been, and I want to show her all my favorite stuff, all my favorite places. I do plan, even if the war doesn't end, to take a 2-week vacation in May or June and go visit South Korea. What are the ramifications of Iran's collapse and the loss of economic activity and military supply chain to Putin? He still gets parts from Iran for Shahid production. I don't actually think that's true anymore. I don't think Russia is dependent on Iran in any way for Shahid production. Russia does import components for these drones that come from like Western companies, but those chips and components go through China or Central Asian republics. So if Iran collapses, I don't think this is going to, like supply chain or military supply, affect the Russians very much. Iran reportedly sold $4 billion worth of arms to Moscow since 2021. So the Iranians have already sold their excess military supply to the Russians in exchange for cold hard cash. I'm sure they valued that cash, and I'm sure there's still some domestic production, maybe like artillery shells or something, that the Iranians then sell and deliver to the Russians. So it'd be great if other military supplies were cut off. I don't think this is going to affect Russia's production of Shahid drones or ballistic and cruise missiles. I think a collapse of Iran more is a political defeat for the Russians. What's happening in Venezuela, what happened in Syria, this is having a psychological impact on the Russian people, knowing that their government can't protect their stated allies. How many times has Putin and the president or leader of Iran gotten together, shaked hands, and said, "Brothers to ever, down with the evil West"? And I honestly don't know enough about Iran, so I want to be careful what I say. I really should dedicate some time and maybe read some books on the history of Iran. But I do know that Iran is a multicultural, multi-ethnic state. The dominant Persian, Farsi-speaking, actually they're not even a majority. They're only 48% of the country. The rest of the country is other various minorities. You've got the Turks, or up here you've got the Kurds. You've got Azeri, which is closely linked to Azerbaijan. You've got Arabs. You probably got Afghans. So violence and brutality is how this country has kept itself together for as long as it's had. And this region of the world, it's just very brutal. This region of the world has really not known peace in the last 10,000 years. There's always been a king or a tyrant or a dictator raising an army and then trying to cross the desert with delusions of grandeur and conquest. And I want peace and prosperity for the Iranian people. I want them to have freedom and democracy comparable to my own. But I also understand the way I think and feel is not the way that everyone in the world needs to think and feel, as long as they have peace. And unfortunately for the Muslim world, I believe in order to have a peaceful, prosperous, capitalist democracy, you need separation of church and state. And for this region of the world, they do not support separation of church and state. And every time they try to fuse together church and state and impose Islamic law on people, this cycle of violence and brutes and tyrants just keeps repeating. We don't know how the cycle will be broken. All right, that's all for this Q&A. Thank you so much if you made it this far. You're a super fan. I greatly thank you guys. I never imagined that I would still be maintaining this huge of an audience talking about this war 4 years later. 2022 Jake could not envision what I would be saying and doing in 2026 and still maintaining one of the largest consistent audiences on YouTube. It's incredible. Additionally, I'm going to put a plug for my second channel. If you've not subscribed yet, I put my show clips up there. In the events you don't have time to watch my full episodes, or you think there's a part of my show that family and friends might appreciate, you can share my clips. All right. That's all for this Q&A. Till the next one, take care, everyone.